Greetings, folks, and welcome to the second edition of the Cinema Organ Society's interview series, Ask That. Don't forget, now's as good a time as any to like, comment, and subscribe. Well, from this moment on, you see what I did there, we will be asking your questions to our next guest, who is not only fantastic on theatre, classical, and electronic organ, but is known to most of you for his many years presenting the Organist Entertains on BBC Radio 2. Now, with lockdown in the UK, it's meant many people have been changing their appearances. So here for the first time is the new look Nigel Ogden. Greetings, Nigel.
Is the world ready for this? That's all I can say. But here I am, yes. Yes, lockdown makeover, we'll call it. You're allowed to go out for your essential shopping, aren't you? And every time I went out, I forgot razor blades. So that's what happened. And then when I did remember, I shaved the top part and not the bottom. So we're where we are.
It suits you very well. Well, given your background, it's not really surprising that we've had a lot of questions. So we might as well get straight on. So in the next 25 minutes or so, we'll get through as many of your questions as possible. And first of which seems a very obvious one, which is, where was your first theatre organ experience and which theatre and organ?
Right. Well, I'll mention two, because one was a listening experience and one was an actual playing experience. The listening one, like for so many other people, was at the Tower Ballroom in Blackpool, attending one of Reginald Dixon's live weekly broadcasts, which I did then for many, many times after that over the following years. But that was the first time. What an experience that was. I can remember being there, 5 or 6 years old, but it's a vivid memory. And the broadcasts were 10 o'clock, of course. You had to be in your seat by 9:30 because there were so many people there. And I can remember turning to my father, who'd taken me in, and saying, "Why has that big hole appeared in the stage?" And he said, "Oh, you'll see in a minute." And in due course, that was it. And the playing experience was a few years after that, I discovered that the Wurlitzers in the Odeon and Gaumont cinemas in Manchester were available to hire for £1 an hour. And for those who aren't quite accustomed to what a guinea is, it was equivalent to £1.05. And I used to save up my guineas and go and play the Odeon and Gaumont organs, mainly the Gaumont organs. So that was the first playing experience I had.
Now, this is a big question, one which I'm very pleasantly surprised has popped up, because it's one I've always wanted to ask you myself, which is, why did you decide to change your style in the mid-90s from something heavily based around jazz to a more Blackpool approach?
Well, this might be a longish answer. Let me give it a go. First of all, I've never really subscribed to the theory of the Blackpool sound relating to a particular player or players. I think the Blackpool sound very much comes from the instruments there. Well, the one that's still there, of course, is the Tower. I'm talking about the ballroom organs now. And in the earlier days, the Empress ballroom organ as well. From a playing point of view, I've never thought there was one Blackpool sound. There was a Reginald Dixon sound, there was a Horace Finch sound, there's a Phil Kelsall sound, there's an Ernest Broadbent sound. You know what I'm saying? They were all playing the same instrument, but doing their own thing with it.
Yeah.
Why did I change my style? I mean, I didn't change it completely, obviously. Interestingly, I was looking back not long ago to listening to some of my early concerts in the 70s at the Granada cinemas, like Harrow and Clapham Junction, and the Thursford Organ Museum. And actually, there's a lot more about Blackpool in those early concerts those late 70s, early 80s. I suppose the change came about because there's been a lot of talk over the years about keeping the theatre organ appeal to the general public as well as to the enthusiasts. And I suppose there was a period when I used to do quite involved arrangements. And yes, there was a jazz influence there. I think that probably followed from the fact that I was a great admirer of Brian Rodwell, who was a phenomenal player of jazz on both theatre organ electronics, of course, and it was my boss for a while when I worked for Boozy and Hawkes Electrosonics based in St Albans. And so, but there was always a lot of influence of Brian at that time. But I think it gradually sort of dawned on me, and I started to wonder whether some of the arrangements I was doing at the time, I used to go off into convoluted arrangements and harmonies and all sorts of things, and doing things with a tune, which I think generally were well received. But I wondered whether it had quite the wide appeal to the general public. So I think I just got to a point where I thought, well, who was the most widely appealing organist as far as the general public was concerned? And you have to admit, whether you were a great fan or you weren't, Reginald Dixon was the man. So I then thought, well, what elements of his playing style made him so appealing? So I just gradually started incorporating those, because I'd listened to him for so many years, both on recordings and live in the ballroom. And it all soaks in, you know, over the years. And I found that when I started to incorporate that in concerts, it did go down very well, I have to say. And another selfish reason for doing it was I fancied doing it. I thought it might be fun, really. And so having a certain facility for doing it, I started to incorporate that. But I didn't totally go away from my own original style. It was more a fusion of the two. But it was just with that aim of appealing to as wide an audience as possible, really.
Well, that makes perfect sense and leads us very nicely into our next question. Of course, we talked about Reginald Dixon now, and many of us think that you're the most successful living organist at recreating the style of Reg Dixon. What are the key ingredients of it, and what have you found the hardest to master?
Well, it's very nice of you to say that. I don't know whether I am or not, but well, just to go back to what I just said, I'd listened and listened and listened, and it soaked into my brain. And I was in correspondence for quite a while with an organ tuner friend who worked with Reg for many, many, many years, and admired him greatly, both as a player and as a person. And when I was starting to do this sort of playing, he was very helpful and very keen on what I was doing. And he said, the thing you've got to try and do is not copy him, but be him. And I don't mean as a person, but get into his musical psyche, so that if you're going to play something in that sort of style, don't play an exact version that he would have done, but just be aware in your head of how he would have done it and get into it in that way. So that's what I'd really tried to do. As far as obviously the rhythm, and he was a very rhythmic player, a lot of syncopation in the left hand, using the general crescendo pedal for accenting, which I think is very effective. But also he was a great second touch performer, and where he would play whole choruses of things on second touch with the rhythm going on first touch, and the right hand going off into flights of fancy and doing all sorts of things. And I was fortunate enough in sharing one facility that Reg had the same. We were both left-handed. So I've never found it difficult to do that either, playing melody and rhythm with my left hand and doing something with my right hand. So I suppose I never really found it too hard to do. And once I got into that way of thinking, well, just, if you're going to play like that, then do what he'd do. But as I say, it was always a fusion of the two things, really. Does that make any sense at all?
That makes perfect sense. And I suppose we...
I'm explaining it to me. Carry on.
Of course, we can't gloss over this question without mentioning the hard work you did in obviously writing down, transcribing some of the Dixon arrangements note for note. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, it's good of you to mention that, because I was going on to say I'm not copying Reg, but I did, on my Sentimental Journey CD, did a tribute section where, as you say, yes, I did literally copy down onto manuscript about half a dozen 78s and a couple of the old EP medleys, and tried to reproduce those as accurately as I could in terms of the way they were played and the registrations and so on. And as far as the 78 tracks were concerned, it was hopefully as near as you could get to hearing them without all the 78 hiss, but hearing them on a modern recording. It was great fun to do, I must say.
And certainly for somebody who obviously never heard Reg live, it was a great opportunity to be able to hear that organ, because it hasn't changed much over the years, played in that way, but in a really clean, high quality recording.
Yeah, well, that was the point, actually. You were yes, playing the same instrument with the same ranks in the same environment. So yeah, it was a no-brainer, really, as they say.
Now, the next question, which again could be quite a long one, it says, I'm a professionally trained classical organist and want to start to play the theatre organ. Could we have 3 key points as to what's the best way to transfer my skills, given the fact you play both very well?
Presuming that the questioner has already got a pretty good technique as well, we'll start at that point. I would say the first thing to remember, of course, is there's hardly any music written specifically for the theatre organ. So you've got the classical repertoire, which exists. But as far as playing light music is concerned, very, very little specifically written for the theatre organ. So you've got to start as an arranger as much as anything, really. And I would suggest that the theatre organ has often been called the one-man unit orchestra, hasn't it? And that's the way to think of it, is when you're starting to change from a classical instrument to a theatre organ. Think of it as an orchestra. That would lead on to the second part of my answer, which would be to listen as much as possible to the original versions of whatever it is you're going to play, be it show tunes or light classics or whatever. Listen to the originals, and then you'll know, or it'll give you some idea of how to approach it on the theatre organ. That's what I always did anyway, and whether it worked or not is another matter, but that was my approach. And thirdly, I would say, be as accurate as you can in the playing of the music. Now, that may be an obvious thing to say, but what I'm really thinking about is a lot of albums of popular songs have been produced over the years for electronic home organ players, now, sometimes these are not entirely accurate in terms of their melody line. Well, the melodies are usually all right, but the harmonies can be very basic, or not all of the song can be there. I mean, the chorus might be there, but the verse isn't. And so just be careful of whatever music you're using, that it is pretty accurate in those terms. And that's all I can think to say, really. Again, like my previous answer about my own playing, you've got to feel the music as much as anything. So hopefully you can.
So how many organ recordings are in your collection, including theatre, classical and electronic organ? What features on the most interesting or unusual recording in your collection?
How many have I got? I wish somebody would tell me. I have no idea. I would suggest 493,443. I don't know. It's never counted them. There are huge numbers of LPs, cassettes, reel-to-reel tapes, and so on and so forth. As far as the most unusual one is concerned, again, that's a difficult one, but I would say I have a part of a broadcast, well, most of a broadcast by Ina Barger when she was deputizing at the Tower Ballroom for Reginald Dixon, which was actually recorded in Holland during the occupation, when you weren't supposed to be listening to the BBC. So that's quite an unusual one to have.
Now, out of all of the theatre organs you've played, and there can't be many that you haven't, do you have some favourites?
Yes, I do. You won't be surprised that the tower organ is one of them, having heard it so much and been there so much over the years. But also the Manchester instruments, which I mentioned earlier, where I started um, playing the Odeon and Gaumont Wurlitzers. And of course, it was in the era when the Lancastrian Theatre Organ Trust were presenting all those wonderful monthly Sunday morning concerts at one or other of those cinemas. And they were just magical, magical occasions. I mean, we'd all wish it now, wouldn't we? I can remember if they got 700 or 800 people, it was considered a bad day. You know, they were so well attended, and to hear the great names on those instruments was fantastic. So those are the Tower, the Odeon, the Gaumont. Guildhalls. I've always loved instruments with a big acoustic. I mean, I think a pipe organ speaks best into a big acoustic. And so another one would be the Guildhall Southampton. I really enjoy playing that, which fits into my theatre organ playing, my classical playing. I was having the two consoles. It was ideal for doing that. Clay Hall, I love the Ritz, Nuneaton, Compton, which, as you know, sounds so well in the St. John Vianney Church at Clay Hall. The ex-Odeon Sale, ex-Bluecoat School Oldham Christie, which is just about ready to be opened in the St. Mary Low House Church in St. Helens. Again, a fantastic acoustic, and that really, I think, is in the best home it's had so far, that Christie. It really does sound wonderful. And I'll finish off with this little list with the new, again in inverted commas, organ in the Emperor's Ballroom, because the Tower Ballroom acoustics have changed over the years. I can remember when the ballroom floor size went right back to the pillars, and it had a livelier acoustic. When they added the carpeting and put the tables and chairs on, it reduced the size of the ballroom floor. So the acoustic wasn't quite as lively. But in the Emperor's Ballroom in the Winter Gardens, the acoustic has hardly changed at all. And starting with Steve Tovey, sadly no longer with us, but Cameron Lloyd and his team who've put the new organ in there. I admire so much what they've done. I mean, to be able to achieve that and get an instrument back in there. And it sounds, in so many respects, so much like the original organ. I mean, you've heard it there yourself. I'm sure you would agree with that. So, yes, I love playing that organ.
Now, how did you feel when the BBC scrapped the Organist Entertains a year short of its 50th anniversary? And did you have any idea that they were going to do so?
Yes, I did have, starting with the second part first, yes, I did have an idea. I had a visitation from a member of the Radio 2 hierarchy in December 2017. It finished in May 2018, I think, didn't it? So, yes. How did I feel? Two parts to that, really. I felt very sorry for the listeners and the enthusiasts because I couldn't really see a good reason for it to end, because as they also acknowledged, the listening figures were still very strong, the audience was still very loyal, and so it was still, it had retained its popularity, but it just didn't fit in that. And it wasn't just the only program, there were 2 or 3 other specialist programs as well, which they got rid of at the same time. They decided it just didn't fit in with what they wanted to do with Radio 2. So I was sorry for the enthusiasts, particularly, and the organ-loving listening public. How did I feel? Well, I missed it in the early months, obviously, but, you know, 38 and a half years, it's nearly a full working lifetime. And I'd always said to myself, one day this will end. Nothing lasts forever. And I just count myself incredibly lucky to have been able to present it for those 38 and a half years. So from a personal point of view, yes, I missed it initially, but I gave it my all for the time that I did it. Really, that's all I can say.
Well, certainly. I mean, I enjoyed listening to it every week, and I'm sure many other people did as well. You always tell funny stories regarding people of the past, perhaps because of the Organist Entertains, or perhaps prior to that, but how about another funny story?
In May 1972, Robin Richmond, a lot of my funny stories involve Robin for some reason, but he was such a character, wasn't he? In May 1972, Robin came to the Gaumont, Manchester, to do a young Organist Entertains concert with myself and 3 or 4 other young organists, as we were at the time. And that went well. And then thereafter, Robin invited me on a fairly regular basis to record item sessions for the Organist Entertains. We used to record 6 items at a time, which in later years became 8. And my first 2 or 3 sessions were at the Playhouse in Manchester on the ex-Empress Ballroom organ. But then Robin said to me on one occasion, how would you fancy going and doing a session for us on one of the Granada organs in London? To which the only answer was, is the Pope a Catholic? I mean, yes, I'd love to do that. So he booked me a session at the Granada Kingston, which was a beautiful organ. And so I duly went down, drove down. This was in April 1975, I think. Oh, it was, because I was looking at the contract for it not very long ago. I recorded 6 items. I'll have you know, I got £3 per item. They didn't stint, they weren't skimping on their expenses. So I drove down, did the session. Robin was there producing the session. And when it was all over, he said, shall we go and have some lunch? There's a lovely little pub nearby. So I said, oh, that'll be delightful. Well, Robin's was more liquid lunch than anything, as was often the way. I was driving, so mine couldn't be anything more than non-alcoholic liquid. So Robin, we sat there over lunch and nattering away, and as was sometimes the case, Robin got more and more morose about the state of the organ world and the state of listeners who complained about what he was putting on the Organist Entertains and so on. And I got to know some of that myself in later years. But anyway, we duly finished lunch, and he said, you couldn't possibly drop me at Richmond Tube Station, could you, so I can get back into central London? I said, yes, I would be delighted to do that. So I drove him from Kingston up to Richmond, and Robin used to carry around at that time a bulging briefcase, an old briefcase, which looked as if it dated from the mid-19th century. And it was full of, well, I don't know what it was full of, but everything Robin might ever require at any one moment. So we said our farewells. He got out of the car, and there was a zebra crossing right by Richmond Tube Station. And halfway across the zebra crossing, this briefcase collapsed and decided to disgorge its contents all over the zebra crossing. It was a fairly breezy day. And all of a sudden, flying about the road with BBC paperwork and copies of Sweet Georgia Brown and 5'2" Eyes of Blue. And this famous organist, Robin Richmond, scooping it all up in the middle of the road. And I might tell you, drawing on his comprehensive vocabulary at the same time. So, and I couldn't help, because I was in the car and I couldn't park anywhere. So I just had to watch this unfold before my eyes, and it was fascinating. Anyway, then he got what he could manage, a wave of the hand, and he disappeared into the station. I thought that was fairly amusing. Whether I should have done or not is another matter.
Oh, you have to write this down in a book, I tell you. You've had a long, amazing and successful career in music. Is there anything else you still wish to achieve in music or in anything else?
Well, if it doesn't sound too awful to say, it sounds like complete lack of ambition. I can't really say there is, because I've been so lucky. My career has been so varied, and my playing has been so varied. I mean, as well as all the theatre organ playing, I've done so many concerts, churches and cathedrals. I was assistant organist at Manchester Cathedral for a brief period, so that was a wonderful experience, and having to learn music, not just organ music, but choral repertoire as well. And all the accompanying I've done. I mean, the Lancastrian Theatre Organ Trust used to put on those fantastic concerts at the Free Trade Hall during the period the Wurlitzer was there, with the male voice choirs, 500 voices, and the Wurlitzer thundering away. And you know, it's all been fantastic. I can't really think of anything I really particularly wish to do. Although I will say one thing. We mentioned the Empress Ballroom a little while ago, and Cameron and the team are working hard at restoring the original console of the Empress organ, which is now back living there, of course. And I think there's a hope that that may well might end up back on the stage where it used to live. So I wouldn't mind playing that again at some point, because I played it so often when it was in the BBC Playhouse studios. I was there every other week doing something on it. But to play the original Empress Ballroom console in the Empress Ballroom back on the stage, that'd be good.
Yes, it'd be like two old friends meeting again.
Well, yeah, something like that. Yeah, yeah.
And lastly, but not least, final question, which is, how do you spend most of your time these days?
Oh. Well, it's getting on for 25 years. I've lived in Lytham now, which is, for those who don't know, is on the Fylde coast. On the promenade at Lytham is a famous windmill, which you know but have seen. And it is 8.5 miles from Lytham Windmill to Blackpool Tower. So we're just down the coast a bit from there. The area is often referred to as Lytham St Anne's, but they are in fact two separate towns. So I live in Lytham, and it's 2 minutes from the house to the promenade and the beach. So there's plenty of walking available when the weather presents itself. Too cold today, I can tell you. So playing wise, of course, in recent times, there's not been opportunity to do very much, but apart from playing at church, we're still doing every week. The rest of the time is spent with my two Morris Minors, of course, one of which you have experienced yourself, haven't you, in the past? Yeah, I've got, for those who may be vaguely interested, they are two Morris Minor 1000s, and they are both pristine. One of them is the 948cc 1000, the other one is the 1098cc 1000. That one, in fact, was one of the last to be made. It was first registered in October 1970, and the last one rolled off the production line in November 1970, so quite a late one. But yeah, I spend my time tinkering with those and polishing them and driving them around and playing the organ at home and playing at church and going out and about.
Well, that's wonderful. And yes, I have experienced traveling in a Morris, not only with you, but with other people as well.
Of course.
And fascinating machines. Well, thank you very much, Nigel. It's glad to see that you're looking so well, despite all that's going on in the world at the moment.
I'm very well. It's been a pleasure. I hope that what I've nattered on has been of some interest. That's all I can say.
I'm sure it will be. Now, all I need to tell everybody is that, of course, you've still got time to like, comment and subscribe to what you've seen today. And I do hope you've enjoyed it. And that our next subject for Ask That will be going across the pond to the States, where we're very privileged to have a chat with Mark Herman, who, of course, is one of the brilliant younger organists over there and is doing great things with film and with television. So we look forward to that. So from me, and indeed from Nigel, wherever you are, take care and see you next time. Thank you.